For the people I haven't met yet, my name is Lawrence Gallegos, and I'm with the Western Landowners Alliance and also with the National Latinos Farmers and Ranchers. And I'd like to take this time to introduce our state engineer, Mike Hamman. Mike was raised in Taos and received his Bachelor's of Science degree in Civil Engineering from the University of New Mexico in 1983. Mike and his family live not too far from here in the small town of on a farm in Corrales, New Mexico. Mike has more than 40 years of engineering and water resource management experience, primarily in New Mexico, with a focus upon the Upper Rio Grande Basin water projects and issues. Mike joined the governor's office as senior water advisor on January 3rd from the position of executive officer and chief engineer of the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District located here in Albuquerque. He worked with multiple jurisdictions, including state and tribal levels, including the 6 Rio Grande Pueblos in the Middle Rio Grande Valley. Prior to working with the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, Mike served for 17 years with the U.S. Bureau of Reclamation, culminating as manager with responsibility of over 13 water projects from the San Luis Valley in Colorado to Fort Quitman in Texas. Mike served as the regional water planner for New Mexico's Interstate Stream Commission, water utility director for the city of Santa Fe, and was water administrator and head of the utility authority for the Jicarilla Apache Nation. And without any further ado, I'd like to give you New Mexico State Engineer Mike Hammond.
Good afternoon, everyone. Pleasure to be here. Thank Lawrence and Lynn for the invitation to address you. I envy you and your beautiful setting over there. I'm sitting in a hotel room in Minneapolis, up here with our New Mexico team, negotiating on Texas v. New Mexico issues with the state of Texas and the United States to try to resolve the current compact litigation going on below Elephant Butte for the beautiful Mesilla Valley, where a lot of agricultural lands and communities are potentially threatened by litigation going forward. And that's one thing that we want to try to avoid in just about every part of our state. But unfortunately, when the water supplies get tight and concerns about the future kind of raise to a high level with folks, sometimes it devolves into litigation. And that's one of the jobs of the state engineer's office, is to try to do everything we can to manage water and administer water within the state to keep litigation and disputes between our communities down to a minimum, and hopefully in a collaborative environment, so that we can manage our drought conditions that are becoming more dire with the concerns about raising temperatures from climate change and the degrading watersheds that we're seeing as a result of longer term drought and the like. So I stepped into this job, as Lauren said, here just a few months ago, and what a challenging time to be stepping in as state engineer. But I wanted to talk with you all about the conditions that we see. I happened to chair remotely again on Monday my very first New Mexico Drought Task Force, which is a governor's formed task force of many of the secretaries of the natural resource agencies, as well as the finance and commerce type agencies within the state of New Mexico. And we're constantly evaluating the effects of drought, and also taking a look at what resources may need to be brought to the table, whether we need to make recommendations to the governor for emergency drought declarations, which I think we're at that point now where we're going to request her to issue emergency drought declaration, which makes the state eligible for federal dollars in the event that those are available to help us mitigate drought. I also worked during the special set or the legislative session, the 30-day session, to address mitigation issues with the legislature. And we're finally getting the political will to wrestle with the long-term impacts of drought. And we were able to secure over $30 million to help mitigate drought right where you're sitting in the middle of Rio Grande. We have $15 million made available by the legislature to work with farmers to temporarily fallow lands while we are struggling. Hello? You guys still hear me okay? Raise your hands, okay. Thank you. Yeah, we've got under deliveries to this, they call it the state of Texas. It's really Elephant Butte Reservoir from the Middle Valley. There's a compact that requires Colorado to deliver water to us, and we have a certain amount of water based on the flow that comes into the Middle Valley. A certain percentage of it must be delivered down to Elephant Butte for the downstream state, which has two major projects down there of roughly about 130,000 acres of agricultural lands that are served by what they call the Rio Grande project. And we're behind on deliveries because of the drought. The last 20 years has been over 22% of the long-term average. And it's 35% less than the previous 20 years of water supply that we experienced. So we're coming out of one of the better periods of time in the history of the Rio Grande Basin for water supply, which was 1980 through 1999, into possibly one of the lower periods that is starting to compare to the 1950s drought cycle that we had back then. And to manage that, the legislature provided this following funding for various farmers that can voluntarily help us catch back up on our compact debit so that we can continue to manage the middle Rio Grande Valley with storage of water up in the Chama River Basin, and also to manage for endangered species and ecosystem resilience throughout the middle and upper Rio Grande Basin. So that's a big challenge that we're working on. We've also working on at the behest of the governor to develop a 50-year water plan that really gets our arms around the climatic impacts that we're going to be seeing in the next 50 years. And what does that mean? What do we need to do as a state to prepare for higher temperatures and the resultant impacts to the water supply situations? We're certainly already seeing lower snowpacks and earlier runoff associated with that. We're also dealing with catastrophic fires in watersheds that is degrading our watersheds to the point where they lose functionality as a reservoir themselves. So we kind of get a double whammy from climate change, is that the upper watersheds serve as a very large reservoir of supply, and also high quality water, a high quality environment that we've all experienced up in the upper watersheds of our great state. But as they degrade and actually get somewhat destroyed in a way with catastrophic fires, it takes decades for the a watershed that's gone through that level of stress to recover. It just continues to compound the problem, and so we've got to wrestle with that. We've got to work together, like you all were talking about earlier, in networks and collaboration and community by community, working with our state agencies and the federal government to really hone in on the problems that we know we can address, and not continue to put our head in the sand and just hope that Mother Nature we'll turn the corner and we'll go back into a wetter period. It's not likely. It's something that climatologists and other scientists are saying is going to certainly impact the traditional snowmelt runoff setting that all of our infrastructure is based on. So we may have to make some major changes in the way we capture and use water than we have in the past. And we also have to recognize that our agricultural endeavors and our communities need to be integrated and work on developing resiliency, both for community water systems, drinking water systems in the rural parts of our state, and also the local agricultural development, because I think food security is an issue. We've got global supply chain issues that are cropping up, exacerbated by unfortunate other things in the world, with like wars and struggles and fights over resources as things tighten up in general. And so we, the state of New Mexico, need to be resilient. We need to work on our food security by promoting good agriculture, by developing direct connections to the folks that need the food from the farmers, try to cut out all the middleman stuff and try to connect at that level with a good agricultural base that is doing it both for the survival of the future of our communities, but also get paid a fair price for the food they produce. I think that our agricultural systems need to be addressed in that regard as well. But under the state engineer's office and what we call the New Mexico Interstate Stream Commission, our responsibility is to plan for and develop and then also administer the water of the state. And we have to do that in a balanced manner with the existing water users, the existing communities that rely on that resource. And there's a certain amount of economic development that must be developed and balanced in a responsible manner that we take into account in terms of what they call impacts to existing water rights. So those are all the things that we keep in balance. We have a new industry coming into play here that we're responsible for assuring the communities that the water rights are available for the cannabis, the recreational cannabis industry. We're actively involved in that. That's another component of the agricultural world that, now that it's legal, is attracting a lot of interest. We do see that as a viable utilization of some of the water resources, just like any other commercial agricultural activity. So those are all the things that we're involved in. We are reaching out through, and I would encourage those of you that are interested, is to engage with the 50-year water planning process and review that document. There's going to be a public review out in late May, early June timeframe, to share your thoughts and concerns and recommendations of what you would like to see the state of New Mexico work towards in preserving our environment, our water supply situations, and our agricultural base as a necessary component of our future. So with that, I'll close out my presentation and my remarks to take any questions that you may have.
Okay, Mike, I'm going to try to facilitate that real quick.
Okay, great. Oh, and by the way, Lawrence and I, we've realized that we probably knew each other back in the high school days up north.
Okay.
I'm not hearing you guys now.
Yes.
Okay.
I can hear you
Okay.
now.
You can hear us?
Yeah.
Great. Okay, we're gonna. Question. Okay, we've got a question over here.
What sorts of projects or programs or ideas do you guys have for supporting sustainable wages for small farmers in New Mexico?
That's a little bit outside of the purview of our agency in terms of direct engagement with the producers. We're a water management, water supply entity. We do, however, work with a number of groups that support agriculture. We have the Department of Ag in the state of New Mexico. There's programs with NRCS and others, but all of those have complexities. Anybody that's made applications through some of the federal and state support programs know that it's a challenge to get those grants to make it work for you. But there's collaboratives, young farmers in New Mexico. I mean, there's different groups that collaborate that try to help individual producers achieve their goals with, if you're adding hoop houses or, trying to expand your operations and make it more seasonally year-round kind of growing programs and whatnot. There are resources for that and help to specifically apply for those kinds of funds. But it's outside the purview of our agency. But I would encourage you to network with some of the like Agricultura is a good organization as well, that can help folks network and apply for grants and whatnot. Actually, the Bernalillo County has a really great agricultural support program. I'd recommend you look into that. They really want to help small producers achieve their goals. Don't overlook your county extension office as well in whatever county you're in the Middle Valley there, to reach out to the county extension office, and they have a lot of resources to help as well, and networks to suggest. So that's how kind of a long answer to your question, but there's a lot out there that I know of personally, because I have a small farm. My son grows organic vegetables, and we sell at the farmers markets, and we have a lot of fun doing that kind of stuff. In fact, I'm going to add a couple of beehives to my place now that we have enough pollinators that we've put into our little farm now to support the bee population. So we're excited about that opportunity as well. But anyways, I encourage you to reach out to those networks. I'm sorry, I can't hear you guys again.
Tyler.
I heard you for a moment.
I have to translate this. Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Okay. I think the question is from Rick Martinez, and he wanted to know about where he can learn more about water banking. He is with an acequia and would like to bring information about water banking back to his parciantes.
Certainly, Rick. It's a kind of a unique thing going on in the Middle Rio Grande Valley through the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District. I would encourage you to reach out to a gentleman by the name of Casey Ish there. If your acequia is in the Middle Rio Grande, there's already a built-in water banking program there. But if it's outside of the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District, acequias can set up their own water bank within their own acequia organizational documents that would allow for the individual parciantes that may not, for some reason, they may not be irrigating for a season or part of a season, or they want to share part of their water supply with a fellow parciante for whatever reason. Those things kind of happen organically anyways in acequias, but if there's a more formal setup, the acequia itself with its bylaws can go ahead and put together a former water bank. And there's a guy by the name of Jonathan Martinez, who runs our acequia program in the Interstate Stream Commission, who has, and mostly from a resource base for measuring devices and efficiency improvements and stuff like that, but they also have resources to help for better water management within the acequia. So that would be a resource you could look to. I think there's a kind of an acequia section on the Interstate Stream Commission website. But water banking is pretty much a function of the individual organizations and how they set them up. There isn't really anything at the state level. The state does allow for that under specific like shortage sharing agreements or whatever particular groups might want to put together. There is a water banking component to that, but we don't necessarily administer those water banks.
All right, we're going to try this again. Can you hear us?
Yes.
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Mike, I was just wondering how it's working out with the fallowing program that you started this year, and is it going to be sufficient to at least make up some of the deficit that to Texas? And you know, I've had conversations with some of the farmers and ranchers that I work with National Latinos, and I've gotten feedback saying that you know, we shouldn't have to pay water back to Texas. And could you explain to us why we have to meet that obligation?
Certainly, and it's got a long history, but back in the late 1800s, there was a huge amount of agricultural development up in the north in the San Luis Valley in Colorado, and it created shortages in the Middle Rio Grande and also down in the Lower Rio Grande in the Las Cruces, El Paso area. And there was lawsuits filed. It was back in the territorial days. There was a lot of concerns about water supplies, the historic communities, including the pueblos and the you know, the early European communities were suffering the acequias, etc. And there was a lot of sedimentation and a lot of damage from overgrazing and various things that were going on back in those days. So they developed a an understanding of the problem. They did not allow for any more development up in Colorado. And they essentially negotiated a status quo compact that requires a certain quantity and volume of water to be sent down from Colorado to New Mexico. And then New Mexico has an index gauge at the Otoe Bridge, which is up on the bridge that goes to Los Alamos there that crosses the Rio Grande. There's the Otoe gauge, and a certain percentage of the flow that passes the Otoe gauge by law, by federal law under compact, that was essentially affirmed by Congress, that manages the interstate delivery of water. So we'll just roughly about 60% of what passes that gauge, depending on the flow rate, has to be delivered to Elephant Butte. And once that does not occur, then New Mexico goes into debit, and then we're in a more difficult problem where we can't even use our reservoirs upstream to help manage our water. So it really makes it tough on New Mexico when we're in debit to the state of Texas. So the following program that we put in place is first year. It did okay. We also have endangered species requirements. So there has to be some base flows in the rivers for endangered species. The silvery minnow and some willow flycatcher and the yellow-billed cuckoo and other vegetation. There's 4 plants that also have endangered species issue with it in the middle of Rio Grande. So all those things are factored into what we have to do nowadays. We used, in good times, the water, the compact deliveries kind of take care of themselves. But and like I said, we're 22% over the last 20 years. On average, we're 22% less than the long-term average flows at the Otoe gauge. So we have a resource problem, and so trying to get that water down to Elephant Butte is much more difficult. The river channel efficiency is really degraded over time, so we got to take a look at that so we get better deliveries down to Elephant Butte when we do have water to keep us out of debit. But for the time being, we have this following program that's just temporary and voluntary, and we have about 4,000 acres participating in it this year. And I expect we'll get more next year. And we're hoping we'll just chip away at that debit and get back to where we can operate normally. So hopefully that answers your question, Lawrence.
How about now? Can you hear us?
Yes, I
Yeah,
can.
we can.
Okay, great. Does anybody else here have a question? I have a question, but I want to sort of prioritize other people's questions. There are. Okay, hold on.
How does it work, the relationship between like the 30 by 30 goal of getting land into conservation designations and then putting land out of production if there's not enough water? Like, is that land not in production considered not conserved, or is that considered a type of conservation?
That's an interesting question. I can't really give you an answer to that because it's kind of case by case. I think there are conservation programs. I work when I was at the Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District. We supported an outfit called the Rio Grande Agricultural Land Trust, and they have mechanisms to work with the Natural Resource Conservation Service to put lands into conservation easements. And and that those count in the 30 by 30. If you're if you're putting lands that you're going to fallow or whatever, then and put it in a conservation easement, then those do count under the 30-30 program.
Thank you. Anybody else before I ask my question? Okay, I actually sort of have two questions. One is sort of a simple question, and I don't mean it to in any way be snarky, but have you ever, a 50-year water plan sounds great, and would love to follow up with you to just make sure we have clear information about how folks can participate in that process. But I'm curious if there's discussion about putting together a much longer water plan. I mean, 50 years seems like a long time, but it also goes by really quickly. So that's one question that I have. And then my second question is about if the Office of the State Engineer has it in their purview to work with municipalities to come up with smarter development strategies that help us sort of meet whatever long-term water conservation goals we need to be making and then really working towards. And I'll just give a little context for my question. I live in the East Mountains in Bernalillo County. There's a ton of development happening there. Our issues are less surface water and more groundwater related, but it seems like when we talk to the county, it often sort of falls on deaf ears that there's a relationship between the development that's happening there and the extraction of groundwater, and sort of a lack of acknowledgement that we're trying to meet short-term economic goals sort of at the expense of the long-term viability of community being there based on the water resources. So my questions are related, and I'll let you go ahead and respond.
Okay. Yeah. What we're really working on in the 50-year water plan is this concept of resiliency for the long term, not just 50 years, but the reason it's a 50-year plan is it's looking at what we can reasonably expect to happen with the climatic models and everything that we know now. It's a little harder to look beyond that. I mean, you can, but it starts to sort of diverge into the noise of modeling, if you will. But we're getting our, getting the political will, I guess. It's a document that's designed to get people's attention about the problem that we have now, as well as what's coming at us over the next 50 years from a climatic shift perspective. And so it's really designed to sort of crystallize the political will to stop putting our head in the sand and realize that we can't stay on the same path that we're on. And that applies to the second part of your question too, is that if the development planning that's going on does not fit into that resilience sustainability strategy, that will become a criteria for the state engineer's office in approving new water rights permits, et cetera, then those permits will likely be denied. So there is a role for our office in that regard. But it's also up to the individual counties too. I mean, and the municipalities or unincorporated areas that are run by counties. I mean, there's varying degrees of land use planning that goes on. In the more rural parts of our state, it doesn't happen very much. They don't have the resources to do it well, but they need the tax base, so they're willing to approve, a development to get that tax base up. And it's just kind of a downward spiral in a way. Where the tax base relies on development, employment relies on it, people need housing, what do you do? So we get stuck in the middle of that process because the planning and zoning is not occurring properly in the county, at the county and municipal levels that that should be, and somehow or another, we're tasked with the job of trying to control development with administering water. So it's kind of this weird circular thing that's going on, but we certainly are going to be using the recommendations and the approaches, such as what you're recommending. I think is that there has to be more resilience and more sustainability built into land use development approval as a fundamental aspect of those moving forward. So or not. So anyways, I hope that answers your question.
It does. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I think that we are at time. Anybody have any last questions before we say thank you and goodbye to Mr. Hammond? Thank you so much for joining us. I really appreciate you taking time in the midst of what sounds like probably pretty challenging negotiations. Thank you for all you're doing for us and water in the state. We really appreciate it.
Yep, and thank you for inviting me. It's good to see the young faces out there joining in and doing your part to create the next generation of good, sound resource managers and hope for the future is what I see in the eyes of our young folks getting involved in these efforts. So more power to you all.